Welcome to Use Your Items, a video game podcast on the design and philosophy behind the games that you and I love. I'm your host, Jason Weiss, and with me, as always, is maybe the world's best detective, Francisco Martin. Francisco, what's going on today?
Oh, it's going great. I am ready to ask, as the world's best detective, I am ready to ask the important questions. Who is this game, and what fate befell them?
Indeed. Who is this game and what fate befell them? Today we are talking about Lucas Pope's, I guess, nautical adventure, you might call it. The Return of the Obra Dinn. This is a great one. This is the one that I started the series with, my blog series on useyouritems.substack, and this is kind of what sort of led me down the path that eventually got us here to this podcast. So it's kind of cool that we got to come back and visit this one together. So
Yeah, I had never played it, and I've always heard good things about it. So I do remember reading your the non-spoiler section, but mostly non-spoiler section because there were a few things here and there of your blog, but I have since forgotten everything, honestly. So I was very excited that oh wait, I was able to forget this. I'm able to experience Obra Dinn in a way with zero knowledge about it other than nautical adventure, cool graphics. And I really, not to get a little bit too spoiler on the non-spoiler stuff, probably the best way of experiencing this game, to be honest.
yeah, yeah, I think so. We'll have a spoiler and a spoiler-free section as always. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments, please drop them for us at our in our Discord, linked in the show notes below, or just in your podcast app of choice. RIP Google Podcasts as of next month. That is the best way to get in touch with us and ask any questions, offer any feedback, or just join the conversation. And yeah, I would say here in the at the top of the spoiler-free section, yeah, I mean, the best way to play this game is if you haven't played it, just play it. And if you like Lucas Pope, you like Papers, Please, I feel very safe saying you're gonna like this game, and you should just pick it up and play it. It's usually pretty cheap. It's pretty. I don't think even full price. It can't be more than
It's
$25.
it's $20 at full price, so you
Yeah,
can
20
easily
bucks at
find
full
it on the.
price. I'll tell you, I was just at a deli earlier today, and they had a special lunch special today, and it was a sandwich, a bag of chips, and a soda for $12.95. That's You're over halfway to Obra Dinn at that point. What do you got to lose?
Yeah,
Have a
just
peanut
skip a
butter and
meal.
jelly at home. Get yourself Obra Dinn. You'll have a great time.
And just for those of you who don't know who Lucas Pope and Papers, Please is, we are going to be getting into that. Some of the story behind the development is just as interesting as the story itself and the game itself. But before we get into all of that, time for our time-honored tradition section of Behind the Box. This time brought to you by Jason.
Lost at Sea, 1803. The good ship Obra Dinn. Built 1796, London. Roughly 800 tons. 18-foot draft. Captain R. Wittrell. Roughly crew, 51 men. Last voyage to Orient. Cape Rendezvous unmet. Contact. East India Company. London office for inquiries or testimony. An insurance adventure with minimal color. In 1802, the merchant ship Obra Dinn set out from London for the Orient with over 200 tons of trade goods. 6 months later, it hadn't met its rendezvous point at the Cape of Good Hope and was declared lost at sea. Early this morning of October 14th, 1807, the Obra Dinn drifted into port at Falmouth with damaged sails and no visible crew. As insurance investigator for the East India Company's London office, dispatch immediately to Falmouth, find means to board the ship, and prepare an assessment of damages. Return of the Obra Dinn is a first-person mystery adventure based on exploration and logical deduction.
Thank you. First thing that really pops out, just because of how normal it is. Insurance investigator?
Yeah, this is an insurance adventure. I don't know what's so weird about that. I mean,
Honestly, yeah, all the greats, all the great,
all
all the Halos,
Mario,
Mario,
Donkey Kong,
Donkey Kong.
everyone's favorite insurance adjuster, Rayman. You know, just a classic genre of insurance adventure. I'm gonna start calling everything an insurance adventure, actually.
Yeah, and just finding ways of how you can, squeeze why it's an insurance adventure. The Mario's did a lost persons insurance adventure. He's looking for the lost person, Princess Peach, deciding, okay, how much in emotional damage. Okay, we're getting off.
Yeah, I think we're a little off track. That's
We're off
okay. We'll
track
come back
already.
to it. We'll come back to it in Discord. Yeah. So that's
Just
right
like
off
in
the
this
top.
game, you'll go back a lot
You
of
will go
times.
back. You will go back quite a bit. So yes. So here we are, a first-person mystery puzzle game. Not usually my go-to. I'll be honest. I'm not super crazy about puzzle games, but this one was a little different. It is a murder mystery. I would call it a detective game, and I have in the past. Many others have. I don't think Lucas Pope personally calls it that, but I don't think he has a problem with it either. It is a point-and-click adventure with minimal pointing and/or clicking,
Yeah.
and it has a main mechanic, which is a pocket watch. So it's a first person game. I think I said that. And you have a pocket watch inscribed with Momentum Mortem, a tool with various utility, though the most important is the ability to experience the last moments of someone's life. So you aren't a typical detective or insurance agent. You do have a bit of a superpower, I suppose, or I guess it might be a curse, that you get to sort of physically travel back in time as a observer at the moment of someone's death. And yeah, this is basically the whole premise of the game. You end up on a small dinghy traveling to this half destroyed ship, Obra Dinn, and you are there to sort of solve the mystery of what happened to the ship and the crew on it, for the explicit purposes of figuring out what the East India Company has to pay out to the family members of the crew. Typically, at this time, a merchant ship like this would have been insured by the company that owned it or contracted it. In this case, the East India Company. And yeah, there would be insurance payouts to widows, children, families, kin, stuff like that. Or if there were contractors on the ship, there could be payouts to the contractors company. It's very not so different from today.
Yeah, it's crazy how such a and we mentioned that Lucas Pope has worked on this other game called Papers, Please, in which you are a border officer checking the paperwork of immigrants crossing the border. And it's crazy to see these very mundane stories with just a simple twist. Honestly, Papers, Please doesn't really have a simple twist. This one has a bigger twist of like, oh yeah, you just so happen to have a pocket watch that lets you go back in time and see how specifically people died. Wow, that's what a useful
Yeah.
tool for this sort of person. Um, Along with their pocket watch, they have one other item, and I keep calling them they because honestly, you never know the name of the main
Right.
character or the if you want to call him the play, I'll call him the playable character because we don't. Depending on your
The
definition,
adjuster.
they might not be the main character. Along with this, they also have a book, a journal of sorts that is written by or given to you by one author of HE. You don't know who this person is, and the book is essentially has a preface saying, "Hey, this is a story about the Obra Dinn. I can tell you that there were like 10 main events that happened on this ship that should help you kind of piece together what happened. And just so you know, chapter 9 is probably going to be impossible to solve, so don't worry about that. They don't tell you anything about who they are. You
Right.
have no idea how they know this. You can make some insinuations, but I'm not gonna stop myself from telling you what my insinuations or what your insinuations should be, because at the end of the day, this is very much a mystery game. So this is one of those games that if you know the mystery, the enjoyment of this game, for me personally at least, would go down substantially. Like knowing
Yeah.
knowing what, not just what happened, but the story beats of certain things that happen is very important to how Lucas Pope has crafted this narrative for you.
There's a way in which the game sort of plays out linearly. It's not 100% linear. I think there's a few moments where you can kind of rediscover, you can discover different things in different orders, but very much so. There is an A leads to B led to C, and interestingly enough, you will tend to solve this mystery. I guess you will solve this mystery from back to forward. So
Mhm,
usually, so the first acts of the voyage will be some of the last things that you learn. So
mhm.
it's a really interesting way in which the game sort of approaches the narrative structure of its overall story. As somebody who gets, as the adjuster, as the player, you walk backward through that story, and then it has this sort of metafictive quality that we'll get into when we start talking more about the pocket watch, and when we start talking a little bit more about how we play into that story itself.
Well, why wait? Let's get into it. So,
Yeah.
one of the big things of we've mentioned like you're deducing who these people are and how did they die and all these different things. But so the way that the game works is that every time you find a body, you activate your pocket watch, you go to their final moments, you essentially open up your book and write down, this is all done automatically for you. Write down, hey, this is the picture of the person who died, this is the chapter in which that person died. And then it has two questions for you. Who is this person? How did they die? Or what fate befell them, depending
Yeah.
on the situation. And whenever those two things are multiple choice, but very big multiple choices, honestly, because for the who are they, there's 60 people on board. So that is a 60-person multiple choice.
Yep.
Then there is the how what did they die? I actually went through and did some number crunching to talk about how many options we're working with here. So minimum possible of options. There are 34 of the death options in which it doesn't have a culprit. These are like burned or exploded or things that essentially don't have a person doing the thing. And then there's 13 of them in which they are actually like knifed by blank or shot
Mm-hmm.
by blank. So that's a total of 47 at the very least. If you're ignoring the fact that you need to also identify the victim and also identify the culprits. If you take that into account, the quick number crunch is around 48,000 possibilities for
Oh my
every
god.
single
That's
option.
awesome.
Obviously, it goes down as you figure out more like, oh, this person is definitely the captain. Okay, so now
Yeah.
you go from 60 to 59. So obviously, 48 is technically on the first one. The first few are very easy to solve. The game actually does a really good job at showing you a deduction score. For each character, this is kind of
Mm-hmm.
like breaking a little bit of the meta. Like, how does the game? How does the person know that this it would be difficult to know
Yeah.
who this person is, but it's useful to give you some kind of indication as to which people should you be solving first, which people you should be solving second. Then you go from there, and the game has a very smart mechanic in which after you've solved three fates correctly, the game will tell you. It won't tell
Yeah.
you if you've been wrong. It'll just be like, hey, congratulations, you hit three. These are the three that you have done correctly. And I think that that shows such a intelligent designer intent that I really want to talk about because
Yeah.
this isn't either good or bad. I don't think that choosing three is a good or bad design. Um, if you chose one, then brute and or two even brute force would be a little bit too easy. Like you can just brute force and select. Especially later on in the game. But a lot of puzzle games aren't like that. A lot of puzzle games are, hey, you have one puzzle in front of you, Professor Layton and the
Yes.
Witness, and these types of games. You have one puzzle in front of you. You can brute force this one puzzle, and we will give you that dopamine hit immediately once you solve it,
Mm-hmm.
even if you solved it by just brute forcing it. In this game, if you did four or more, that's way too much. There's it might as well be zero, and it's more realistic. Like the most realistic version of this game, right, is like it never tells you until the very end. Like it'll be like tisk tisk
Could you
tisk.
imagine?
You did it. I kind of low key and would imagine if people who are huge into like Agatha Christie books and like are
Okay.
huge like detective and mystery novel folks, I bet they would have loved a version of this game in which they get to know nothing until the very end. I'm not one of those people. I
No.
definitely think that three is a really respectable amount because it titters on the edge of allowing you certain level of brute forcingness if you need it, especially later on in the game, but not making it too big where it's absolutely useless to brute force it.
I think that's a really great pull away for just kind of thinking about both the designer intent behind all the small intricacies that make Obra Dinn so great, but also what make Lucas Pope such a great developer and such a great designer. And I'd love to take a second to kind of talk about Lucas Pope as we sort of lead into his design philosophy in general and
Mm.
in Obra Dinn. But I do very much agree that there's a little bit of nuance to having a puzzle game like this, like you said, where everything is it. So I kind of presented it as there's 60 word problems that you have to solve. None of them they're not math word problems. They are just like, logic puzzles. And the logic that you're trying to deduce everything from is from being a observer in these scenes. And that is such an interesting twist on the puzzle genre as a whole because it does require you to understand a very consistent and concise chain of events and a language of that events to get to a certain point. And I believe that's something that even like the Witness manages to do, even though that tends to be a single puzzle in front of it.
So yeah, I guess we should go, excuse me, I guess we should talk a little bit about exactly the anatomy of those snapshots. If you're like how exactly do those snapshots look like in a beat by beat? Would you like to do the honors?
Sure. So, uh, in short, there whenever you use the pocket watch, you are sort of transcribed back in time to the moment. You'll so basically you will find a corpse or a scene of a death in the present day. It could be bones, it could be blast marks on the wall, it could be a corpse, what have you. There's a number of different things that will show up and it could be just a pile of viscera, and you will open up the pocket watch automatically, and you will have the option to travel back in time as a just an observer of a still moment frozen scene at the exact moment that person ceased to be a person and became a corpse. So it's very much everything is at the moment of death. Every scene, every snapshot is a distilled moment of violence. That is the way these 3D snapshots work. And it is 3D. The whole game is 3D, so you can move all around it. There will be barriers in the way if there's something that you can't walk over. You're not like a ghost. You can't clip through stuff. And that does start to matter because there will be a number of times that I think it's just so clever that there's just like there might be something going on. There might be a fire on the boat and like you can't walk through fire and you have to like go around it and like look from a bad angle and make some
Mm.
deductions. And so with this tool, you are going to constantly travel back. You're going to listen to a few seconds of the person right before they died or the
Yeah,
scene right before they died.
that's like a very important piece because that is probably where you will get the most straightforward information. Essentially, right before the snapshot is presented to you in 3D, there's like anywhere from like 5 to 15 seconds of dialogue, and this is completely voice acted, but it's all on a black screen, kind of like old timey wimey like text on a screen while voice like happens, kind of like in these old no audio movies where like every time somebody talks it just comes a black a screen with the words, except that
Yeah.
that part is voice acted and it is one after the other until it immediately ching appears in front of you and you are there seeing the snapshot, and that is both makes the game both easier but not too easy, because you will hear people say like, "Captain, get over here," and you're like, "Okay, cool. I know that the captain is in this." You
Yeah.
get to a snapshot and you notice there's freaking 15 people in here. Just and then you need to like still
Yeah.
piece it together, like how exactly does the radio play, I like to call it a radio play because that's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
how they present it, because there's also other sound effects, there's also explosions and the creaking of the ship and all these different things.
The
So
wind, a
the
gunshot, the sound
wind.
of fire. Yeah, it's a game that's asking you in these snapshots to use all of the information given so that you can deduce a logical conclusion on what's around you.
Mm,
And so that's really crucial here. Like, and if I was still a teacher, this is a perfect game, I think, to teach the differences between deduction and induction. And I wish I still could, because there was I remember teaching lessons on this when I was teaching like seventh grade reading, all about teaching like mystery novels and stuff like that, and using the idea of deduction of I'm taking facts that I see before me to draw a conclusion based on the context and the interaction of them. That's what's happening here. It's a game that's empowering you to make all of these decisions and to determine these things. It's a game that I think so geniusly makes you feel smart. It is a
yeah.
game that constantly is rewarding you, not just with like a dopamine hit of the loot box hit a legendary, or I got the 1 in a million Widowmaker snipe on Overwatch, but it's a game that is constantly rewarding you by making you feel like you're very, very smart. You understand what's going on, and moreover, when you're wrong and you get to go back and fix those moments of being wrong, and then you put it all together, and then other pieces of the story start to slide in together. I think Lucas Pope is genius for really being able to distill that experience, and that sort of quote unquote dopamine hit to something that feels so viscerally different from going on a kill streak or something like that,
Yeah.
in a different kind of game, in a different genre. And to that point, one of the things that really stands out to me in Return of the Obra Dinn and in this sort of design philosophy, right, is that it is a story that is so much about filling in the blanks that you don't really participate. You don't participate in the story. You are really just here basically creating a book. You're filling in the blanks of a book. You have all of the pages in front of you and you have to line them up in a particular way. And I I so dearly love what's happening here as a way of understanding how stories are constructed, how a plot can be created from start to finish, and then shattered and broken up into different shards and used to tell smaller stories over the course of the greater one. And this is something that's like so critical to a lot of early metafiction in like modernist and postmodernist writing. It's for all of my English nerds out there. It's giving Italo Calvino's "If on a Winter's Night a Traveler." It's giving House of Leaves. It's working on this angle of the story is a fabric that can be cut and crafted and moved around, and we can still have this overall experience. And it doesn't necessarily need to be, introduction, rising action, climax, falling action, denouement,
Yeah.
conclusion, blah blah blah. The witch's hat that we all drew in American schools in middle school and high school and stuff like that. So it's just a really interesting way that Lucas Pope manages to create this treadmill of player experience by making you feel smart, but then is also doing something that's really really important in just the way that we tell stories in video games. And I'll probably get into a little bit later, but there's certainly games that are very popular right now, or probably should be maybe a little bit more popular right now, that I think certainly are running because Obra Dinn walked.
Mm. It's funny that you mentioned all that about the chapters being such an integral part of this game because it actually wasn't originally in the original design of the game,
Really?
actually. Yeah, so originally all deaths were presented without placing them in a chapter. It was essentially you had 60 deaths slash fates, and you just need to figure out where the heck they existed and everything like that. But he very quickly realized with feedback, one of his early demos was with 19 characters, and people were
Hmm.
completely lost. They could not figure out when things happened. He was like, oh, whenever he was already in that point in time, he was like, that's less than a third of the characters that I want to put into this, and they're already getting confused. I need to figure something else, and that's where the chapter idea came in and just giving the player, hey, this person died on this chapter. I guess in meta story of how it the reason why it works, why you know when it took place is because your pocket watch technically tells you when it took place.
Yeah.
It's this is very small detail. You don't really need this ever because of the chapters and how the book is set out or anything, but your watch actually does. The little hand points to the chapter in which it took place.
Does it
Yeah, that's what
really?
when you open it up and it shows you the little hand is telling you which chapter and the big hand is telling you which part, essentially, like where
I did not notice
it's
that.
it, it's a cute detail, but it's not really a very useful thing because of the
Yeah.
book and things like that. So it's just one of those like, oh wow, this is definitely something that an auteur like Lucas Pope sees the detail and he's like, oh, I can use this for this information. It'll the people most people won't notice, but those who do, it'll it. So quirky Willy Wonka character. Woo! Um,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it speaks to Lucas
yeah.
Pope's sort of mastery of design here as a
Mhm.
solo designer. I think we should jump into the game development. I know
Yeah.
I kind of led into doing a little bit about Lucas Pope earlier and we didn't get to it, so we'll
Let's do
do
it
it all
now.
here. So, uh, yeah, we'll jump right in. So the game was released on October 18th, 2018 for Mac OS and Windows computers. Shout out to my Mac users. You have no excuse now for not playing it. It came out for you guys
That would have
first. So,
been
uh,
so funny if Mac didn't, for reasons we'll figure out later, it would have been hilarious if it didn't come out for Mac first, or at the same time at least.
I think yeah, it was the same time.
That's a little bit of
So
foreshadowing.
a little spoiler, a little taste bearing the lead. The game was created by Lucas Pope, as we've said. He is formerly a designer for Naughty Dog on the Uncharted series, as well as he made a few small blips before he really sort of left AAA development during his time there, just like small indie games. He decided to leave, move to Japan, and pursue more independent development and independent titles. And during this traveling back and forth between the United States and Japan, he became interested in the work of passport and immigration inspectors. And if you have had the privilege of traveling internationally, you know very well that there's a certain flavor to the experience of traveling in between countries and going through your country's security and then going through the destination country's immigration, their customs, and sometimes you get pulled aside, you get asked some really weird questions, or they make some very weird comments about your passport, and it's a very unique experience. If you haven't, I certainly recommend it, if not for anything other reason other than to travel. But he became extremely interested in this experience, and so he created Papers, Please. That is a game where you work as an immigration inspector discerning the documentation of border crossers in the fictional country of Arstotzka. It makes $29.4 million in gross revenue, which is almost unbelievable when you think about a game that came out in, I think, 2016. I don't have my notes on
2018.
Papers, Please.
And oh no, wait, no, my bad. Of course, 2018 is Obra Dinn, but this is Steam only. I forgot to uh put it on there.
Yes, that number is Steam only numbers. An incredible hit for an indie developer who has a pedigree, sure, but nobody's playing a Lucas Pope game because they're like, oh my god, he designed that one level with Nathan Drake and Uncharted. That's just, unfortunately, that's not how game development works. Although maybe it should be. I'm the one who put that one texture on Widowmaker's gun. I don't know why I'm harping on Widowmaker right now. He makes Papers, Please. This is sort of a breakout hit for a lot of reasons. I remember when Papers, Please came out, because it was in many ways it was a puzzle game of a different genre, of a different sort, that is asking some really serious questions about the world that we live in and the ways in which borders are managed and imposed, and what it means to be in like a totalitarian country under a totalitarian regime. It gives a lot of sort of 1984 vibes by George Orwell. And it's for me, at least in my history of games, Papers, Please and Lucas Pope releasing that is kind of this moment of like, oh shit, you can really do a lot with video games. You can do way more than have Mario jump on a turtle and throw a shell around, you know? And I sort of understood that, but this is one of the first times that I saw a game kind of push the envelope on that. That and probably like Depression Quest were like the first two that really stood out to me in terms of like really being able to tell a story and reach into a well that is much deeper than maybe previously. But that's a bit of a tangent. But Lucas Pope says that Papers, Please was such a great hit, and he wants to work on a passion project, and now he does not have to worry about financial stresses or deadlines, and so he's going to take his time. And the game that he makes is Return of the Obra Dinn.
Yeah. And before we move on from Lucas Pope, I want to kind of like give a sort of there's a certain level of sauce that comes with a Lucas Pope game. Lucas Pope games are very
Yeah.
much they are nothing if not pointedly trying to say something. Even in its smallest details, it is trying to say something. And as a fun example, let's talk about mouse sensitivity in Obra Dinn.
Okay.
Did you try to change the mouse sensitivity in Obra Dinn?
I played on Switch.
Oh, okay, then you missed the opportunity to find Lucas Pope's sort of joke or manifesto. It's up to the listener to decide. These are the options. It is not a slider. It is not between 1 and 10, where 5 being default, and you can choose to go slower or faster. Here are your options. Going from the middle to slower. The middle
This is
is
awesome.
perfect.
No, no
Standard.
way.
Just call it perfect. That's all it is. On top of that, fast side of perfect, reasonably fast, unreasonably fast, a parody of control. Those are your options if you want to go faster. If you want to go slower, side of perfect, just slow, strugglish. What a good word, strugglish.
Strugglish.
Nearly motionless.
I'm gonna start saying things are strugglish.
Damn, it's a very strugglish week. What can I tell you, you know?
Sometimes it is.
So this gives you kind of like already, and this is the first thing that I experienced about this game. Like usually whenever I start a game and if I'm in the main menu, I like to play around with the menus and see like, oh,
Yeah.
what options are there? And I saw this, and this just immediately went me off in like some kind of meditation realm of this is either a manifesto on what perfect sensitivity is. This is a commandment from somebody who knows and has opinions, and you will respect his opinions because this is his game. Gosh
Yeah.
darn it. And you will like it or not, or leave it. Leave. I don't need papers, please. I didn't need you. Leave if you don't believe this, if this miffs you. Or on the other hand, this is somebody who is this is somebody who obviously knows about DPI, a mouse. So
Yeah.
making something perfect makes absolutely no sense because if the DPI on your physical mouse is faster or slower, then it's gonna affect your. So it's gonna be different. It doesn't. You can't solve this on a software point. So this is either a manifesto or a cry of help from somebody who's been hurt. Somebody who's had way too many arguments with colleagues about what the sensitivity should be, and people just telling him, "Oh, it needs to be this because this is the perfect sensitivity," and he's like, Okay, dude, whatever, sure. I will.
That's awesome.
It's
That
one
that
of those
sounds like
two.
there's like a inside joke between him and a friend who's like, yeah, the perfect mouse sensitivity is like some arbitrary DPI number or some weird number that doesn't correlate to anything, and so he just puts it as perfect in his game. That's awesome. I have to respect somebody who goes to the lengths to put so much discourse in something so small and insignificant as mouse sensitivity. I didn't experience that. I played on Switch, but that is incredible. That might be that's probably like mouse sensitivity trauma is probably going to be the title of the episode. I'm not even going to lie to you. So thank you for
I
giving me that.
This is the if I ever meet Lucas Pope in person, this is the first question I ask him before anything else. I'm like,
Yeah. What's your
Obra did mouse
perfect
sensitivity.
mouse sensitivity?
What is up with that? What happened there? Please
Oh
tell
my
me. There's a
god, that's
story.
so awesome. I love that. So, with that in mind, another hang up, I guess, of Lucas Pope's for this game is that he wanted 1-bit graphics, which I think is really just an awesome touch. This is sort of pulling back to his history of playing point and click adventure games on it wouldn't be DOS, it would be like early Windows systems.
By reading along, it looks like Macintosh was his point of reference, which is
Okay,
why I was
so
like, oh, it would have been very
oh yeah,
very funny if you decided. In fact, that's another option that you have in the options menu. I don't know if this is available on the
I
Switch.
it was. I think I know what
Okay.
you're about to say.
So in your options menu, you can switch. I guess I should explain first what is one-bit graphics. One-bit graphics is a graphical rendering that makes it so that everything on screen is either a colored pixel or another colored pixel. It could be black and white, so it's either black or white. It's not exactly grayscale because even in grayscale, you have different
A
tones
gradient.
of a gradient exactly between white and black. This is literally get white out, that's white, and
Binary.
get black. It's one. That's why it's one bit, right? Because 1 bit you have binary, so it's 0 or 1. And the what some of the options in this game is kind of giving the player different screen options from computers of old. The default is Macintosh, so it is the first color, the light color is kind of like a gray, maybe tinging on green, and the black color is kind of like also tinging on green but much darker. So but then from there you could go to IBM, which is barf green as the light
Yep.
color, like Matrix green, not barf green, Matrix green as the light color, and practically completely black as the black color.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, well, this is crazy. And so you can go between all these options, and it really shows that Lucas Pope really he has multiple times mentioned that he started with the main conceit of this game was not a mechanic, was not the story, it was the graphics. He wanted to make a 3D game with 1-bit graphics. Not many examples of that around. A lot of examples of 1-bit graphics on 2D, but not really in 3D. So he started with that, and he before he even created a mechanic. He just went to town in Unity and started playing around and seeing how he could get it to work.
That's a really interesting note that it started with 1-bit graphics. Do
Hmm.
you find that when you're designing and developing games for yourself, that I know you're working on like a VR game right now, what is generally like the design process for you when it comes to starting design on a game? Is it something I'm sure it's personal to each developer and designer. So like, what kind of leads you down the path?
For me personally, it is mechanic or story. Usually more on the mechanic side for me personally.
Yeah.
I have a couple of ideas that are kind of artistic, art focused or graphics focused, but at the end of the day, they are very much like I usually start, this is my mechanic. What story can I tell with this mechanic? And then what art best emulates that? Like, am I going for a more puzzly, like squares and triangles and very abstract, or am I going for more surreal, or am I going for a more realistic? And then I decide what the art is around that. Having somebody who decides on the style and works on the engineering side of things is usually not, it's very uncommon from a mechanics and design, because whether we like it or not, artists are usually the least likely to also have coding experience. So it is a little bit difficult to for an artist to start and be like, I want to make art and I'm going to make a game for it. There are people out there, anyone can learn how to code, but designers, most designers started out programming and then became
Yeah.
designers, for example. So it's much more, it's less of a swallow to pill for a designer to be able to do some technical stuff than an artist to do technical stuff. There's a very few times where either the technology or the art is what pushes forward a mechanic. Some of them are, for example, Half-Life. Half-Life was pushed forward by the physics and the physics source engine. Essentially, they made this source engine. They were very proud of it. They were engineering, and they're like, "Awesome, we made this engine. Well, we might as well make a game around it, I guess."
Yeah.
And that's where Half-Life came from. Like they had an engine first, a technology first, and they pushed. For art, trying to think of an example. Oh, how about that one fits. I was gonna say Superliminal, but that one kind of fits into mechanics a little bit. Superliminal being a game in which you use perspective to solve puzzles. A bit more difficult there. There are certain games I would need to look into it. Remember, of games that the art came first before anything else came about. But they do exist, and Obra Dinn
Yeah.
is one of them.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point. I know I know in other scenarios, it's called bottom up or top down design, and
Hmm.
top down design being more thematically story driven design, where I want to tell a story about pirates. I'll figure out how that translates into a game later, or what kind of story that translates into later. Versus, I want to tell an epistolary novel, and oh, I guess I'll tell it about pirates because traveling
Hmm.
by sea makes a really good is a really good reason or excuse to send letters, or like you were saying, like I have this one design philosophy sort of stuck in my head. I'm wondering, especially coming from, I wonder if Lucas Pope coming from Naughty Dog in Uncharted, where Uncharted is kind of really is starting to play with this idea of like hyper story driven, character driven cinematic experiences as almost a top down level of design, how much that has influence on him as a solo designer. So again, if we can when we get Lucas Pope on the show, we'll ask him, but until then we'll stay wondering. So yeah, a little bit on that 1-bit graphics there. It's very cool to hear that that's sort of what he started with. A point I'll make quickly on the 1-bit graphics is that it creates chiaroscuro, which is the Italian term for literally meaning light dark. And it's most famous in paintings by like Caravaggio or Da Vinci. Namely, the Virgin of the Rocks by Da Vinci is one of the most preeminent examples of it. And I can put a link to the National Gallery in London. Has that painting. And so, but it's really just about creating these extremely tonal differences and contrasts between very, very light moments and very, very dark moments. And it creates generally what I would call, what the kids would call vibes. I would call it like an intense drama, and like this severe moodiness in a scene or a show, or in this case in the game. And there are moments where below deck it does feel far more severe and overwhelming and almost foreboding because of that graphical style. And so in a way that it's something that is so unusual to see in 3 dimensions in video games, as even as recently as 2018. This is very classic art shit. Like this is as OG as it gets, as far as like Renaissance art comes. So interesting to sort of see the cycle of it all.
Well, I'm not gonna let us get away from this, because this is honestly one of the most, not jarring, but one of the most amazing things that hits the player immediately. The art style in this game is such a crazy thing, and the thing that I want to get into, I'm about a listener. We are about to get pretty technical here. From an engineering standpoint, if you are for some reason find this boring, I understand. You can skip 5 minutes, I guess. But I kind of want to go a little bit
I'll put
into.
tags.
Perfect, thank you. I want to go a little bit more into how this works because it's actually not that hard. It is not that. I am surprised that it took this long for somebody to make this effect in a video game because it isn't that crazy difficult to do. So before we get into specifically how it's done, quick rundown on how graphics work. You have by the way, sorry, artist friends and developer friends, I am very simplifying it here. You have three main pieces to any graphical system. One of them is models, one of them is materials, and one of them is shaders. Models are just three-dimensional data representation of objects. You just use a point in 3D space using X, Y, and Z, and then you define that as a point in space, and then you have neighbors to that point. And once you have two neighbors, you have a triangle, and that triangle makes a surface. Expand that out, and you have a full model. This is where, side note, when a game tells you over 10, when somebody tells you it has over 30,000 tries, tries is short for triangles, and it's just telling you how many of those surfaces exist in a model. Usually, the more tries, the more fidelity and the more higher quality that model is, and the more performing, at least less performance it is. So you need a beefier computer to work on it. So that is, but that itself, the model itself, has no data as to how it's actually drawn. It is just locations in space. That's why you a lot of the time see this as a wireframe. It doesn't have, you can see through it. It doesn't have anything on it that really ties to how it's going to look on screen. For that, you need materials. Materials are things that you put onto a model to kind of give it a little bit of definition as to how it's going to be rendered. This includes shininess, opacity. If you want to have a color overtone over it, you can also do that. And one of the important things, it also is where you'll have your texture wrapping. Texture wrapping, so for those of you who don't know, is how we make models have a color and be able to be seen the different colors and clothing and all these different things. Just imagine it kind of like gift wrapping. So if you have a gift wrapping, it's a 2D piece of paper, and then you wrap a box to make a present. That's essentially what texture wrapping is. We're just taking this 2D texture, this 2D image that we have unwrapped, and we are now wrapping it around the model to kind of give that wireframe an exterior skin, so to speak. So there you have your models and your materials. The issue with these two is that these are both static information. These are information that all they have is data of space, data of how shininess it is, but it doesn't actually run the code that says, hey, I'm receiving light. I'm going to shine more because I'm receiving the light. That exists in shaders. Materials have shaders, and shaders are the underlying runtime system that finds a certain pixel, runs some processing power, and then tells your hardware system, hey, so at this point in space, show this color. And it does that. Shaders do that for every single pixel on your screen. So it is a very parallelized process. Shaders need to be very lean because they're going to be running all the time on every pixel, and that's what shaders are. So, um, the most simple shader, by the way, is the one that works with shades. That's why it's called a shader. And the shade, the way that works is it detects, okay, this ray of light is hitting me. So because this ray of light is hitting me, I have this red Corvette, this red car, and this ray of light is hitting me here. So I'm going to send the hardware saying, hey, at this space, show red. If no light is hitting me, I'm going to tell the hardware, actually, at this space, show black. And that's how you do how rendering at a very simplified level works. So game engines nowadays have a basic set of models, materials, and shaders. Practically every engine will have a capsule, a box, a sphere. It'll have a preset of materials, and that preset of materials will have a preset of shaders, including Unity, Unreal, and Unity, Unreal. Unity being the game engine that Obra Dinn is made in, which is a whole tangent about Unity as a game engine, both the good and bad. You can do amazing stuff with Unity. And this is proof that you can do crazy different looking stuff. Unity gets a bad rap of being just the asset flip engine. No, you can do some crazy cool stuff in it.
Is this a
So,
bad time for me to mention Super Auto Pets?
the Super Auto Pets video in Unity?
I'm pretty sure it's like made with stock assets in Unity.
Oh
Like, or it started
no!
off in stock assets in Unity. I mean, listen, it's a great game.
It's a
Anyway,
good game. It's a great game. I love me some Auto Battlers. Having learned rendering 101, congratulations, Jason. You have learned all about
I'm ready to make
rendering.
a game.
You're ready to make a game. Well, you only get the credits if you can answer me this one question.
Oh no.
Where does Obra Dinn do its magic? Is it at the model level, at the material level, or at the shader level?
My guess is that it does it at the shader level, but the shader is acting in such a way that it's basically just saying yes or no.
You go with accolades. You can skip 102 at that point. You can just move forward. Yeah, it is solved at the shader level. Just as a bit of a side note, you kind of technically could solve it at the material level if you, for every scene, make the texture wrapping, you pre-make it with the dots and the pixels so that that way when you wrap the model, then it already has the graphics that like that one big graphic on it.
Yeah, that
So you could technically do it with the materials. The problem is that it doesn't react to light then because it is baked into the texture. That becomes baking lighting, which is a whole another topic. Really interesting stuff if you want to do some homework. But yeah, shaders. That's exactly where it would be. In fact, this already has a name, and it's been around since like the early 1900s. It's called dithering, and
ooh, dithering. That sounds
dithering.
that's so funny. I was just thinking when you were talking about solving this problem at the materials level, it made me think of Roy Lichtenstein, who is a
Mhm.
modern artist, famous for like the pop art, ready-made scene, like Warhol type era stuff. And he's known for doing like these comic book style arts or redone like reduxes. And he's famous for like these really huge dots. Like his dot matrix is gigantic, so I guess it would be like gigantic dithering, and that's what he's famous for. So it's funny that it all came back around like that.
Yeah, and dithering since the early 1900s. It wasn't used for image processing because obviously computers weren't that powerful. Slash, we didn't have ways of using computers or screens for that matter to show this. So it was more used in other signal processing items. Around 1960s to 1970s is when you first see this dithering algorithm being used to scan pictures. So you would scan a photograph. You didn't have the processing power or the fidelity on your screen to show off all the pixels and all the colors. You only had a black and white screen, so you would use this algorithm to dither the item, and you show a picture on screen. So we have where we're gonna our plan of attack. We're gonna hit the shader, and we know the algorithm. So let's really quickly. This is the last thing. Let's go over the algorithm really quickly. It's very simple
Let's
algorithm
let's
actually.
do it.
And that's why I say this isn't that hard because it is genius. So let's say you take a gradient texture. This is gonna be an X by X PNG image, or whatever you want to call it, in which every column, the column on the left, is all ones. One designates full white. The column on the right is zero, full black. And then you distribute it just like a gradient from lightest to darkest. And that is your texture number one. And then you take texture number two, and this texture is going to be a noise texture. Now, noise textures, for those who you don't know, noise textures are probably VFX artists' favorite texture. Literally any VFX that you can think of probably has somewhere around it a noise texture, because it is a very easy way for you to randomize things in such a way where you can get from 0 to 1 data. So in our case, this noise texture is going to be a pattern assortment of randomly assigned color values between 0 and 1. or not color values, light values between 0 and 1. So one pixel, it could be 0, the next one could be 1, the next one could be 0, and all so on and so forth. To simplify the process, let's assume that this one is not completely random. It is a pattern. So it's a bit of a pattern. So what you do for the algorithm is for every pixel, for every coordinate 0, 0, that would be the top left, you check the gradient texture. If that pixel has a higher value than the same pixel in the noise texture at that coordinate, if it is greater, then you output 1. If it's less than, you output 0. Just like you said that it decides 1 or 0, that's exactly all the algorithm is doing. It's taking this gradient, it's taking this noise, and it's just deciding, okay, I'm just going to output ones or 0, ones or 0. So how is this useful, right? Congratulations, we've dithered a gradient. How is this useful? Shaders can use the output from another shader as input to the next shader. So what you do is you render the scene with normal lights, and then you use that output, like that 2D image, you use that output as the input to your dithering shader in such a way that now you have this, all your 3D models have a gradient on them because of how light is affecting them. And that's where you use the dithering technique, and then you output to the thing. So now you have essentially created a shader in which it dithers a 3D space depending on light. So if you go into that engine, the engine that Lucas Pope made, and you put a point light and move that point light around, the dithering would automatically update to look exactly how it would look if you had dithered it post processing. Um, I don't want to. This whole thing, by the way, is not for me to say this was easy. Anyone could do it. Don't be so amazed by it. There's so much more going on here. Like this is step one, and he has a whole blog that I started reading and had to stop because it's like 50 pages long of every other problem that came around with dithering. For example, motion sickness was a huge problem. Apparently, when you had dithering at this scale in a full screen, you just had these like motion sickness problems that he had to solve. The noise texture was too recognizable, so you could see the pattern over and over again. It was way too distracting, so he needed a way to randomize that. But the base idea of dithering it, super simple, super straightforward, and honestly, super awesome that he decided, you know what, this is what I want. I don't think anybody has really done this a lot in a 3D game. I'm gonna go for it, and I love that level of schmutz, that level of pushing forward to get that
Chutzpah.
that was the word. I was like, what was that word?
It's not schmutz. It's chutzpah.
Chutzpah. Chutzpah. I will give Jason good videos to watch on this if you want to go down deeper
I
and
would
you
love
want some
to.
images and stuff like that. I'll give you a link to Lucas Pope's technical blog post where he goes crazy deep into it. He was very open about all this, and it was great.
Yeah, I would love to check that out, and I will surely link it in the show notes for this episode. I will just comment. I don't think at any point in time, any, I'll go ahead and say it. I don't think any real gamer has ever stopped and said, "Oh, this is so easy. Anyone could have done it." Or at least, dear listener, I truly, surely pray and hope that that wasn't you. Come on, you could. So the other way to do dithering is you can take a pencil or a pen and you can just make a bunch of little dots on a piece of paper, and that's a lot easier than coming up
It's a
with an
lot less fun
algorithm.
too. Come on, it's a lot less fun.
It is a lot less fun. It is absolutely a lot less fun. But
I will say to your like, oh, I hope that nobody said this. They definitely said. How many times have you
yeah,
seen
I know.
people comment on art and be like, "What? That costs millions of dollars?" Well, you know what? You did it,
My
right?
my favorite example of this is I'll go a little off tangent here, or a little tangent here. My favorite example is the newer art in Magic the Gathering for I believe it's Faithless Looting, where the artist employs a number of digital and real assets to sort of digitally paint like a very unique image. And for a lot of people, they see it as ugly or unappealing. And in fact, it's like a really incredible achievement of blending these mediums. But I don't want to linger on that because that is a deep tangent, and I don't really want to get into art right now. More so than
We've
just
just spent 5 minutes, 10
yeah.
minutes on
It
every.
is really cool to break into the sort of mathematics of art as far as like video games go, because I think it's something that's understated in terms of just, especially for like me, like a layman, right, who like doesn't, I can appreciate art and I can appreciate the work that goes into it, but I don't understand it. And then to I really understand that it's an algorithm that's trying to decide how light sources are reacting to surfaces is kind of amazing when you think about it,
Yeah,
especially considering sort of how recent like digital sensors and cameras are, which are again more pieces of code and more pieces of algorithms that are interpreting light and the absence thereof. So it's a really incredible rabbit hole to fall down, and I'm
it
glad we got
really
in.
is. Did you ever watch that old show? I know the name in Spanish, but it was essentially a Discovery Kids show where they showed how the movie effects are done.
I'm not sure. I could
Uh,
have. I do remember watching a bit of Discovery Kids growing up.
yeah, so I don't remember the Cinemagia, I think it was how it's called in Spanish. And I would, I mean, it's called GDC, honestly. Like, I watch GDC things. I'm like, this is how I made this effect. Oh, look how cool it is. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, that is really cool. No, so it's always very exciting to shaders. I personally think that one of the other jobs that I think if I had to do it again, technical artist, which is essentially the marriage of art and engineering to work specifically on like VFX and creating shaders and all these things, would be something that I would have really enjoyed doing.
Mm.
But I'm more on the engineering side right now, but it is something that has always been something that I see it in the horizon and I'm like, man, that looks really cool.
Hey man, life is long and life is good. You have plenty of time to fulfill your technical artist dreams, and I will be here to support the Francisco Martin School of Design.
It's cool.
When we make our $29 million from this podcast, we'll put it all into your School of Design. It'll
My
be a
next
great
game is
bet.
gonna be published by Use Your Items.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm looking. I would love to. I would love to do that. Okay, all right. Let's get back on track here. So,
Yes.
digging in a little bit deeper, I feel like we've spent quite a bit of time on the development. There were a number of developmental obstacles to the game. We kind of touched on them a little bit in terms of just like actually physically laying out these deaths, 60 characters. Significant amount of playtesting definitely had to be done to sort of iron this out. Like any good mystery writer can tell you from their experience of it, you do really need to start at the end and then sort of write backwards to kind of get you there, because oftentimes like the outset reason for a mystery is almost the least important. You just need to kind of get into the thick of it, and that is certainly the case here, and that's certainly interesting. As the player, you are also sort of recreating that experience that the author would have writing it. So there are some difficulties with that as well. A lot of the difficulties that Fran went through in figuring out and solving those issues with Unity, the engine, and his striking sort of 1-bit graphical style. And then additionally, he is a solo single developer. And so he was able to be nimble enough to do this, but he also had to do this. Like, this is all him. So there was, I think probably until he got into the localization stage, was there was probably just him and his trusted sort of cohort of playtesters and friends that he was working with to get it to where he needed to go. And then voice acting, obviously, as well. The voice acting's phenomenal in this game, and everything's sort of very simple in terms of its design. I kind of push back against that. That is, I assume sort of how Lucas thinks about it, as like a simple modeling style. I think that it's a really incredible feat to have such evocative images and scenes. in this game with such sort of simple effects. But that being said, that sort of simplicity of character modeling was, allowed all the character models to be lit from below, so that way, because you have to be able to identify faces, and you have to be able to recognize faces scene to scene, and also, characteristic features like tattoos on arms, facial hair, just hair in general. It could just be like facial structure, brows, unibrows, like anything like that. Like the level of detail is really intense. I remember there was a sailor who's at one point is like sort of crawling over the edge. He's like clambering over a railing on the side of the ship. This is not a spoiler. And I just remember all I saw about him was that he had a striped shirt on, and I saw him in the crew picture, and I was like, who fuck are you? Like, you were like, he was like the missing link for the longest time. And you do take almost the entire game to figure him out. So there's a lot of really cool moments in this game that you'll experience when you play it, where you're just like, sorry listener, if we didn't mention, there is in the journal you get, there is a image of the entire crew, or almost the entire crew, and everyone on board, that was drawn by the journalist and illustrator that's on board the ship that you got access to. And so that crew picture becomes like this. There's a crew picture, and then there's a couple other images that he drew during the course of the voyage that become just like absolutely like viscerally important to you as you play. Like you're just constantly staring at these pictures basically to try and figure out who is who and who's where, and you're like, would the bosun stand next to like the first mate? Like, would they be friends? And you're like asking yourself crazy stuff. So very interesting sort of design problem to have to solve in terms of character discernment and how that leads you to telling this story in such a way.
Very much
Yeah.
A Charlie gif from It's Always Sunny in
Yeah.
Philadelphia, like talking about
Crazy guy.
crazy guy, the male of something Sylvia.
Yes, the mailroom GIF. I love that. On that point of localization, there's a really great video we watched called "How Localizing Return of Obra Dinn Nearly Sunk the Game." It's part of the Ars Technica War Story series. We'll link that in the show notes as well. And it really ties into the fact that very early on, Lucas Pope had a grammatical structure system used to solve the fates, and he's basically a solo English speaker. So the game was written and designed in English, and the game is very much like it'll be like William Henry is like a blank. It'll be like blank by blank by blank, and it'll be like William Henry was knifed by John Adams, whatever, something like that. And so it'll be basically like a sentence that you have to fill in the verbs, and you have to fill in the subjects and objects of the sentence. And that's sounds well and good, and that's a great way to kind of like mad lib your way into both. You can like brute force and guess a couple of them, which I got lucky enough to do. And I was told that is not how you're supposed to play the game, but that's between me and God. And that leads you to this really interesting problem of sentences don't work like that, and verbs don't work like that in most other languages. Namely, that even like close relative languages like German, or it was probably localized in Dutch as well. I can't confirm that, but in close like sister languages like German, where there's a lot of similar roots, it still doesn't really, sentences don't work like that, and words don't work like that. And the key example is like Fran said at the beginning of the game, when you're filling in somebody's death, it will give you like 40 different verbs or 20 different verbs for how somebody died. And it's like this really tantalizing carrot that they're dangling in front of you, where it's like, it can be knifed, drowned, crushed, spiked, speared, stabbed. And it's like, well, stabbed is a verb in almost every language, but knifed is not a verb in most languages. And knifing can mean a lot of things even in this language, in English. So it's a pretty interesting conundrum to have to solve. So it's a great video. I highly recommend it. I don't want to spend too much time on it here, because I do want to get into the analysis, as we're over an hour in here now.
Oh
so
boy.
yeah, so another long one, I'm sure. So driving the ship back home, pun intended, there were favorable reviews across the board for Return of the Obra Dinn. It was nominated for over 20 awards. It won 6 of them, including the Game Awards 2018 Best Art Direction, the Seamus McNally Grand Prize in the Independent Games Festival Awards Excellence in Narrative at the Independent Games Festival Award. This is all 2019. Best Narrative at GDC, Artistic Achievement at the 15th British Academy Games Awards, and Game Design at those same British Academy Games Awards. And as of March 4th, 2024, the game has, is that 12 million, 13 million Steam sales?
13 million gross revenue.
Okay, 13 million gross revenue. So, and that's where we're at. So, great game, fantastic game. We're going to. Do you have anything you want to add in the spoiler-free section before we get into the spoilers? Because I think this is a good place to move us.
I guess I can just go a little bit into what my spoiler-free verdict is, and we can just move along. How about
Yeah,
that?
let's go for it.
Sure. So my spoiler-free verdict is honestly just if you're a fan of mystery, like who done it, murder mystery type games, just play it. It packs a huge punch for a short runtime. I don't think we mentioned it, but on average, it's 8 hours. Not that long of a game
Love an 8 hour game.
love game. If you're a fan of logic puzzles, play it. I would not recommend this game for people who are a fan of puzzles in which all the information is available to you from the get-go. So your Witness, Professor Layton, Sudoku, if you want to go more classic. It is not that type of game. You will not have all the information in front of you, and you are going to have to explore a little bit to find that. So if you're someone who just wants to sit at a screen and solve what's in front of you, maybe not the best one. I will also say this was coming from an emotional standpoint. I think you need to be in a good headspace for this experience. I personally was very tired and not having the best of a week, so it was sometimes difficult for me to focus, and I kind of regret playing it in that sort of headspace because it just meant that you can only experience this game once. And I bet that there are some things that I would have affected me differently had I played in a more I am focused, I am ready to experience this. I am not going to listen to a podcast or watch a video on the side or anything like that. I need to stay focused. And lastly, this is a weird one because I am telling you to stop listening to our podcast. If you have an inkling about wanting to play this game, play it before you listen to the rest of the
Yes,
podcast.
yes.
More
Do
than any
not
other
listen to
game
this.
that we've talked about. Any other the other games, I think it would have been fine for you to hear the full spoilers and still the game would have been fun to play it. This one is one where I think the final verdict after we do spoilers, I'm gonna say it's much less of a recommendation because at this point you've heard me. You've either played it or you've heard us talk about all the spoilers. So it kind of misses some of that amazing
Payoff.
one-time payoffs. Yeah.
I could not agree more. The game's fantastic. If you're a fan of logic puzzles, it's great. If you're a puzzle gamer, even if you like a more straightforward, I have all the information. You're more of a New York Times puzzle kind of person. I appreciate you. I love you. I think you'd still need to check this out because this is a really interesting feat in just the way that you can create a puzzle and use that to design narrative. I think if you're an enjoyer of puzzles from a more macro perspective, this is absolutely necessary because this is really a really great example of how we can tell stories to each other using puzzles, but also how stories themselves are told. Like I said, this is like a crowning achievement in in the terms of you are telling the story of you are playing through the story of the game by reliving these moments, which is creating a story in and of itself. It's this beautiful sort of reflexive experience, a metafictive experience that is it's just wonderful. I highly recommend it. The story payoff is great. It's very nautical. It is very 1800s. It's got a great sort of aesthetic and vibe. The art's beautiful. The music is incredible. We didn't even mention it at all. I mean, this like it's hard to like I'm looking at just like a still from the game right now and I can hear the music. It's just so evocative, which is certainly worth the price of entry. So if it's on sale, you owe it to yourself to do it. And moreover, I think that it's a game that you could probably easily pick up and put down and not feel like you can. Oh, I solved 3 murders. I'm gonna put this down. I'll come back in a couple days. And I think that is a very reasonable way to play it. There because the action is already done and we're reviewing it as insurance adjusters. You can play the game at your own pace. The striving moment to design, and or rather, I should say, the energy that's going to push you through the game is that you're just going to want to figure out the story. So highly recommend it. Price entry is great. Bang for your buck is great. The payoff is incredible. Thank you so much for joining us, and we are going to move into spoilers now. So if you don't want this game to be spoilered, and we don't want to spoil it for you, we will see you on the other side. We will see you on our Discord. Please join us there. It is linked in the show notes below, and you can find us there. You can ask us questions, tell us we're wrong, we're right. You can ask questions to Fran about shaders all you want. He's offering a masterclass on it later, and we will see you there. So thank you so much for joining us. But now we're going to Okay, so now that they're all gone, how about that Kraken? I know.
How about that Kraken, bro?
I just wanted to let you know that if you were still here and you really didn't want to get spoiled, I'm not pulling any punches. No,
Yeah, I mean, but even you want to have a nautical adventure with magic and curses and not have a kraken. It was obvious there was going to be a kraken. I did not see that there was going to be a kraken.
Yeah, you
Right,
have
it
to.
surprised me.
I mean, I think it's now just the price of entry for any nautical story. Like you said, like you have to have a megalodon, you have to have a kraken, you have to have some sort of sea creature. Because like, what is a good nautical story without some sort of sea beastie? So, I
Mhm.
mean, I think it's incredible. But
Which I think is a great like segue if you let me to talk
yeah,
about
take
because
it.
now since we're talking about the Kraken about how these snapshots are composited from a like directorial like cinematic standpoint.
Oh God, yeah.
Um gosh darn like so like we mentioned every time whenever you go into a snapshot there is a sort of portion in which there is talking, there's sounds, but it's all black. You don't get to see anything and then you immediately see the shot. And this works great. This whole system is amazing for various reasons. One of the things that was very difficult in the transition to 3D for games was how do we enforce a player to see something? In 2D, you can see the whole level. You can see they can, okay, there's the power up. I need to make my way there. In 3D, it could be behind you, it can be above you, sometimes it can even be below you. So how do we make it so that the player looks at the thing that we want them to see first? So making that cut from like black to scene makes it so that Lucas Pope can put you there. He doesn't need to ask your permission to put you. The screen fades to black. You hear the radio play. He puts you right where he wants you, and then almost like a jump scare, but not really a jump scare. It's more like a emotional swell
Yeah.
of sorts. It like, oh my god, what is this is what is going on? And the little radio play in of itself does so well at building up anticipation for like what you said, the Kraken. You hear the storm going and the ship and people shouting, and then somebody you hear the blood curdling as you hear, and then screenshot, you appear, and what you see in front of you is a two tentacles ripping a man apart,
Insane.
and you're like, "What?" You don't know that there's a kraken in this game. This is your first indication that there's anything like not anything out of this world. And you see that, and then you look behind you and you see two more tentacles, and you notice I'm in the thick of it. This is it's fucked. This is there's no thank God that I'm here and I can dip out with my little pocket watch. I can call mom and be like, "Mom, pick me up. I'm scared." Because oh my God, what a smart decision to have these snapshots and be and have force you to not just see what it wants you to see, but also to not see what you don't want to see. But I'm gonna jump into that. But if I want to let you,
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and your point on like this directorial eye is really apt, as I think what Lucas Pope is creating in Return of the Obra Dinn is in many ways a masterclass in scene blocking and scene creation, and it's one that I hope would that budding students of film and especially budding directors might look at something like this as a artistic tool and as an artistic achievement that is not easy to achieve. In many ways, each of the scenes that you travel back into has the same sort of effect as seeing a really incredible single shot from a movie or a show. You can think of, there's so many great single shot scenes in movies. You can think of like the mirror scene in Contact. That's one that I always come back to. Or more recently, there's a really great scene in FX's The Bear, the show about cooking and running a sandwich shop in Chicago. And they have, in season one, there's an absolutely unbelievable single shot scene where it follows basically one character through the kitchen, through everything they're trying to do, and sort of the overwhelming anxiety that can build in that scene. And so this is something that we see all the time in art, in movies, and every single one of these Lucas Pope snapshots back in time is just like this absolute unbelievable just achievement in terms of just what you are allowed to see. Like you said, you get to see so many things and you're given so many opportunities to learn more about the ship and the space that you're in. But at the same time, there's so many things that you glean and determine and deduce via the context clues that are not given to you by the absence of them. And it's just absolutely unbelievable. It's so moving in so many moments, and it is extremely evocative of the action on the ship. In many ways, I kind of get that sense of the Naughty Dog of it all, right? Of the Uncharted 1 and 2 of it all, where you have these I'm thinking like in Uncharted 2, right, with the super famous train scene where Nathan Drake has to climb through the train that's going over the into the canyon or over the cliff or whatever. And that whole scene is like this crowning moment in gaming where it becomes so cinematic and so incredible, and is full of these action moments, and you're just going from like handhold to handhold, grip to grip. And in so many ways you can see that playing out here, because each of these scenes is so emblematic of the action that's taking place in them, and yet there is no action taking place. Everything is like a still image, still life, freeze framed moment. And it's like you said, there's four kraken tentacles sort of starting to pull apart the ship and attack the crew members, and exhibit unbelievable violence against these humans. And in other scenes, it's just a terrible storm that's racking the ship, and somebody gets hit by a cracked mast and dies, and then like he falls and somebody else trips and breaks their skull. And you're going through these rather violent, every scene is violent. Every moment of this game is a sort of ballet between the utter tranquility of being in the aftermath of it all, while simultaneously knowing that lingering around the corner is a moment of intense, extreme violence. Usually, it's not always super violent. There are a number of quiet deaths, either due to illness, sickness, or somebody falls overboard or something like that. And it's just overwhelming in so many ways when you sort of look at the scope of what Pope was able to create here. Just from the aspect that it's one guy that sat down and put together all of these moments and just did all this and was able to create these intense scenes of action and these quiet scenes of retrospection and I guess it's important to note that not every single snapshot is a death. I think most of them
Mm.
are.
No, all of them are deaths. It's just that some of them reveal what happened to some people who didn't die.
Right, right, right. My
There
bad.
are some people who do escape, but they escape while conveniently somebody noticed they're escaping and shoots them. Like it's kind
Right,
of a
sure.
smart workaround, right? Like there's actually one death that is very obvious, like it feels like very pointedly like, oh, obviously there was a death here. Of course there was, where there's these three people who are trying to escape and one of the characters gets mad at one of the characters is like, "Oh, take me with you." A fourth character says, "Take me with you." And then this guy is like, "No, over my dead body, Dane." And that's how you know, okay, that guy's Danish. That's gonna help me as a clue. And then he says, "What? Why?" It was like, "I remember what you did to my brother." Oh, brother. That's another clue.
Yep.
Let me find which two are brothers. And then he conveniently kills him. Like, so then you're like, okay, these three people escaped. One of them was one of the brothers of somebody who died. And I guess this takes us. I want to come back to the other scene that took my breath away, but this kind of takes us to one of the hidden design that I feel like is in this game that Lucas Pope probably kind of meant it, but didn't have to do any programming for. And it's the design of taking out a pen and paper in
Yeah.
real life and writing down stuff. Because this game really was like asking you, dude, I'm gonna have some quality of life stuff here, but I'm not gonna help you that much. You're gonna need to bring out a pen and paper and start writing
So did
stuff
you take
down.
out a notepad?
So this is where, no, I did not. But that's because
Rip.
my headspace was not in the right spot, and
Okay.
I was just frustrated and angry, and therefore I just guessed and checked a lot, and I got a lot of stuff right, luckily. I actually ended the game in 6.5 hours,
Very
which
good.
is an hour and a half earlier than average, and I think that it was probably because of luck. That some
Yeah.
I just got lucky on some guesses, to be honest. So yeah. So bring a pen and paper, write it down. This is one of this is kind of like the spoiler game design. There's a few other designs that are spoilers that we can talk about, but I really don't want to move too far away from this the second scene, the second snapshot that took my breath away, and I'm gonna set the scene.
Please.
So and then you hear some people like very far away muffled, like if they were on the other side of a wall or something. You hear the shoot him, and you're like, okay, there seems to be some altercation, and all of a sudden you hear one, and then you see the screen immediately appears, and you see a guy with a bullet shot just like protruding from their stomach. And the music is very, very diminutive. And honestly, that's very interesting because a lot of things, something we didn't mention with the Kraken was that when the screen turns on, the music suddenly swells. And
Yes.
it's like like there's brass there and it's like, oh my god. But this one is a lot more, huh, what? Yeah, there's just a guy there, and there's a wall here, a wall there, and his back is to the wall, and he has a bullet protruding from his stomach. So it must have been maybe through the wall. That's kind of weird. Like, is there a way for me to move around the wall? Oh, the walls, like, this is okay. I know where I am now. Where we are is in the midship. There is three sections essentially. There's the middle portion where everybody sleeps, there's the cannons and all these things. But then on both the outsides, on the left and right, on the port and starboard side of the ship, there's like these small hallways that serve as kind of like protection. And that's where you find yourself right now. You find yourself in this one stern
It's
hallway.
almost like an alley.
It's kind of like an alley, yeah. But the walls have windows to look into the middle.
Yeah.
So you were like, oh, okay, let me look. And as man, God, I don't know how Lucas Pope did it. Maybe it's programming. Maybe it's just him being really smart at composing music. But as you look through the window, you see something even more horrific than the Kraken. You see, and I'm gonna try to explain, I know now what it is, but you see some kind of like spider Sheila creatures with these giant legs and these spikes coming out of the abdomen, and some kind of dark envelopment on top of like the main body of this weird spider thing, and you're like, what the is that? What's this? And then you try to go to the next window to see better, and you can't because you can't get into the main room. It's all closed off. You can only look through these little windows to see what is going on, what these creatures are, and to have that like amazing point of like, not only am I gonna show you my directorial prowess at composing a scene as to where I want you to look because it's the best shot in the scene, I also am going to show you how not letting you look at the best shot in the scene from the beginning can sort of build this suspense and this confusion that has a mighty payoff. So he just goes down, he just takes like Alfred Hitchcock's book and is like reading like all the rules and is like, okay, I'll tell them about the bomb, but don't show them the bomb. Got it. Okay, got it. Okay, got it. And he just goes for it. And Lord have mercy, what a scene. What a scene.
It's a very striking moment, and it's one that stands out to me as well as this, like, oh man, this guy really knows what he's doing. This is a piece of art that you really only get to experience once. It's like the first time you see like Starry Night or something like that, and you're just like,
Yeah.
damn man, like this is awesome. And yeah, I'm very happy you pulled that scene out because that is one that stands out to me as well. And
Those are my, at least for me, those are my two like, these are the what's that word whenever you are your magnum opus. These are the two, for me, magnum opus scenes that are like,
mm,
I would maybe say the Kraken more than the other one because the other one happens after the Kraken in such a way that you have started to see the patterns of how Lucas Pope does things, and then this scene happens and like breaks that pattern and is very different, and therefore you kind of need the Kraken to happen for this one to hit as hard as it does. So I guess the Kraken is the magnum opus, but this one has a really strong contender as like a follow
yeah,
up to those patterns.
it's interesting. I feel like the Kraken is a very moving segment as well. The scene that you called out with being stuck in these I wish I had the better term for these, like alleyway hallways on the edge of the ship, but when you're looking in on those like riding spider crab things, monstrosities, is absolutely a shocking moment. The Kraken is one for me where I'm glad that I got it, but it wasn't necessarily, like, I would say, a magnum opus for me. There was one other scene that stood out to me as one that was particular there. I guess the one of the more particularly moving ones that really sort of captured my imagination and really sort of solidified one of the best parts about playing this game is that it makes you feel smart. Is there is a scene where there are a couple, I believe it's in the middle section around winter, after a number of crew members die from mysterious illness that seems to have just happened. There's a number of corpses in cots or in hammocks, and then there's a few more people playing cards in the crew quarters. And you're in this scene, and there's just like some corpses, and it is a very quiet retrospective moment in a lot of ways because you're in the crew quarters, and most of the crew are in these hammocks, and most of the hammocks are numbered. And there's this moment where you're playing the game, and this game was recommended to me by my partner Aislinn, And she said after I played it, she's like, I feel like there's like one of two ways you play it. Either you play through it, you get to that scene, you figure out what you need to figure out from that scene, and then you move on, or you have this moment of realization where you're like, there's a shitload of crew members in this entire scene that I haven't figured out yet, and half of them are numbered, and now I can start to draw all of these conclusions based on like all this extra info.
There's a third way to play it.
What's
Not
that?
realizing that they're numbers and just thinking, oh, I guess they're sleeping and I don't get to know who they are.
Oh
And
my
you move on.
Well, yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Is like you either have that moment of like, oh, I guess I just won't learn anything here and move on,
Oh,
or
okay.
you
Okay.
stop and you're like, holy shit, maybe there's more here to it. And at one point, if you stop and you really start to absorb that scene, there's one guy who's sleeping in his hammock and he's completely covered up. And there's a number on his hammock, and his arm is dangling out. And on his arm is a tattoo on his forearm, and you can tie that into other scenes that you find this guy with this exact tattoo on his forearm and figure out who he is and solve part of the mystery. And like at that moment I was like, oh my god, this is so good. This is like, now I feel like Sherlock Holmes, because like I'm like picking up like clues in scenes that I didn't expect. And that was a moment where I guess it just, I felt very, very intelligent. And I give all the credit to Lucas Pope for doing so.
Man, I wish I was smart.
You're very smart. I don't know anything about shaders. So,
Uh,
for a game that's told in these snapshots, I think it's an incredible scene. I think it's important for us to touch on, and like I have some points that I want to get into on sort of the capitalism that's I guess the elephant in the room, because this is a game
mhm.
about insurance agents, about an insurance policy that's getting paid out, and a contract with the East India Company. But there is the overall story that I do think we should touch on. And
Sure.
so I don't want to belabor it. It's a fairly in-depth story, because even though it's such a short experience, the game has a ton of details in each of these moments, and there are 60 people, and you have details on all 60 people. So there's a lot of depth that I don't think we could really do justice just by reading off a series of lists. But the overall impetus, the overall design of the story is that there is this cargo ship that is heading to Asia from Europe, and obviously there are a number of deaths. There are some deaths at the beginning, loose cargo, unknown illnesses, and stuff like that. And like this is like all considered, just the price of doing business. This is sea travel in the 1800s, and then we get into the foul play, but it's not that big of a deal. And I guess, sort of long story short, what we find out is that you find this out much later in the game, but it's one of the first moments of the story. Again, the sort of friction between of the narrative styles. But basically, I believe there is a treasure on board that is from some passengers who purchased like a voyage to the Orient. They're Fujianese citizens, I believe it is, and they have this treasure. The second mate finds out that there's some good shit in that treasure, and they want it for themselves. And so they are trying to mutiny, or at least mutiny and take some hostages, steal this stuff, and leave. And what ends up happening is that there are a number of mermaids that are called forth by this treasure, and it starts killing people. And they, through the use of this sort of mystical treasure, um, they managed to get away and all this other stuff. But basically what we have here is a pretty, I would say, sort of typical nautical story of uh untold treasures, untold possible riches, and the mythical nature of the sea and the things that dwell within it. And so there's, yeah,
There seems to be that the treasure itself kind of has a will of its own, kind of like the ring in the One Ring in Lord of the Rings, where it seems to like change people how they react to it, whether it be
like it
that they're
inspires
just
this greed.
like it inspires this greed to like mutiny. It inspires. There's a scene where the captain, sh- um, his
Witchell.
steward, his steward attacks somebody else, and he says, "Take my steward away. Whatever. What has gotten into you? Have you gone mad? Like 10 decades, and you've always served me well. What's getting into you?" Like as if there's something that is happening here that is
Yeah.
affecting the minds of these people. And it slowly becomes that it seems that it affects the captain as well in such a way that he also wants the treasure for himself.
Yeah. So this treasure, that we don't know how these Fujianese passengers sort of came by, is worth quite a bit to mermaids and to the ocean in general. And so there is, I think, a pretty deliberate personification of the sea in both the Kraken, these crab riding like soldiers, and the mermaids, and it leads to the it's the captain, right, who imprisons the mermaids
Yep, sends them to
and
Louisiana.
tortures them, and this is all in service of trying to call away the Kraken. But I want to just lay out the basics of the story there, because I do think that there is, worthy of discussion, a real question of Orientalism in terms of like Edward Said's Orientalism. So, just from a philosophical standpoint, Edward Said is a Palestinian American philosopher and literary critic who, in the 20th century, wrote a book called, I believe it was called Orientalism and the Occident. But basically, he wrote this philosophy on the ways in which, quote unquote, the Orient or Asia and Asian cultures were perceived by Western culture, and the ways in which our media and our thought patterns are really deeply influenced by this sort of manufactured relationship with the East, as I'll call it, via years of decades and decades of hundreds of years of colonialism and imperialism. And so, in many ways, what you end up seeing from, I guess, to distill, Said's Orientalism fairly and respectfully as I can, there often is a flattening of Asian culture that happens, and you see it to this day. It is something that happens all the time, where Asian cultures tend to get copy and pasted onto each other, and Chinese characteristics, Chinese architecture will be used in strictly Japanese settings when they are drawn by sort of Western actors and Western creators. And I think there is something going on here in Return of the Obra Dinn that needs to be spoken to, because part of that sort of Western appeal and that Western approach to describing and representing Asia and the East is also the mystification of the East and the mystification of these cultures. So, in many ways, you get the essentialization and the minimization of rather diverse cultures. So, like, we're talking about these Fujianese passengers, right? And this is a very specific region of China. This is a very specific populace with a unique culture that is different from every other culture in China, of which there are just hundreds and hundreds, because it is a massive country that is populated by a large, distinct group of people that all have different cultures and different languages and different religious and political and all sorts of different values. And so we have a call out to a specific one. I personally don't know the significance of making it Fujianese versus anything else, and namely positioning these foreign passengers, maybe arguably the most foreign passengers, at least in a Western-based ship that's mostly crewed by Western and North African, I guess, citizens, passengers, crew members. All I'm saying is that there's a bit of questioning on my part of, is Francis Pope, wrong guy, wrong Pope, is Lucas Pope aware of this and is using this in his story to contextualize the story of Obra Dinn, or is this really just a moment of Orientalism, as Said puts it, is so deeply ingrained, and like all sort of systemic forms of racism need to be unlearned and untrained. Is this something that, by mystifying these Fujianese passengers and sort of placing them in this position of possessing a treasure that maybe they should or should not possess, kind of creating this scenario in which a Western man robs Asian citizen of their goods, Asian royalty of their treasured goods, is this Pope speaking to colonialism and imperialism on a whole, or is this more of the sort of systemic nature of Orientalism sort of seeping its way even into this story, where we are mystifying the East and we are creating a story that engenders this sort of reading because we have mystified the East, and in damaging or disrespecting the mystification of the East in the story of Obra Dinn, we invoke these supernatural threats and the ultimate sort of downfall and curse of the ship Obra Dinn.
I would hope that it is the former. I He is married to a Japanese game designer. I would imagine that she would be very instrumental to the playtesting and to the storytelling of the game. I would hope that if it was the latter, that she would have, been like, "Hey, you're kind of feeding into this. Can you maybe change this or that so that way we can like it can be more of a critique?" So I would hope that it was the former. Obviously, that doesn't give us 100% for sure. Yes, it's definitely the former because there's a lot of people that either through internalized, like you were saying, through years of this internalization, they might not even notice it themselves, or yeah,
I
I
would
would hope that it was the former.
I maybe I'm being unfair in my breakdown here. I also don't want to it's a little different here. This is kind of getting into the realm of the death of the author, and sort of
Hmm.
burgeoning postmodern thought of authorial intent no longer matters. The text is all that matters. So is it so much that I'm trying to single out Lucas Pope? Absolutely not. That's not my intent nor my desire. Rather, it's to sort of get to the meat of the story and sort of see the ways in which we tell this story and the ways in which the characters in it, because there are 60
Yeah.
characters, and so I would say that is it likely that some of the characters are maybe just kind of like they needed to write some in? Sure, maybe Lucas Pope did just need to write some in. I feel personally that in a story as tight and compactly told as Obra Dinn, the authorial intent is dripping out of every scene. Like, we've
Hmm.
talked about this so much, right? Where we've set up so much, so obviously, that Lucas Pope has to be, just like pouring over the intent of every single scene that you're allowed access to, in the ways in which it is represented, in the ways in which it is created, and how this story is being told is so intentional, I guess, that it's also hard to wonder that every single character wasn't specifically chosen for a certain reason. So I would just say, as as I played through it, as I am remembering it, I do recall this sort of this curiosity and this wonder in the ways in which we are representing it. So I also operating under an understanding, and maybe this is a false one. I didn't fully I don't remember fully where I heard this, but I do recall hearing that Lucas Pope was interested in making a game that his father could play and
Yeah.
was interested in. And so part of the creation of Obra Dinn is creating a mystery story and creating a mystery experience, and following in the tradition of mysteries of this era and time. You This is in line with it, but that doesn't mean that it's right or correct. So I'm curious. I would be curious to see, in a deeper sort of, obviously this is just a podcast. I'm not writing a dissertation here on an Orientalist critique of Obra Dinn, although that would be an interesting one for sure. but there is, there is a bit of, I would say, inherent nationalism and racism in the story itself that I don't think is Lucas Pope doing, but he's writing it into the story because that's what would be the case in the 1800s on a ship that is crewed by a number of different peoples and nations, and whether it's calling people out by their nationality, by calling them Danes or wherever they're from, and things like that. Like, it is a multinational story, and I think the only true way to tell a story like this would be to tell it multinationally, which I think is important as well, because this is a story about a ship contracted to the East India Company, right? So when we think about colonialism and we think about mercantilism, what do we think about in the West but the Dutch and British East India companies, and the West India companies, of the ways in which they were so integral in the colonization of India, Sri Lanka, of the Indies, Polynesia, of China, and like all of these different regions that we've come to understand. Companies like this had a huge impact on. So I don't think there's any other way to tell this story but to tell it from the perspective of a diverse group and cast of characters, which I think is an important point to note for the storytelling that Pope is doing here as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, yeah, you mentioned all these different things and about the flattening of Asian culture, and that is something that to be vulnerable, me growing up in Puerto Rico, that was like all my understanding of Asian culture. Like, there was no such thing as Japanese, Taiwanese, and all these different Asian cultures. It was all Chinese culture. And it was something that was really racially ignorant and I would say still is, growing up in the Caribbean, where anybody who exhibits certain facial features is called Chinese, even if they aren't Chinese, even if they're not even from Asia. Like, you would just call them, they are the Chinese person. So yeah, that is something that is definitely something that you can even, without even noticing, you might be exhibiting things. You are essentially a product of the time, the culture, and your upbringing, right? And you
Yeah.
might not even know which parts are problematic until you grow up, and who knows, maybe that is the situation here. Maybe it
Yeah,
isn't. We don't know.
it's systemic for a reason, right? Like, all
Yeah.
this stuff is considered systemic for a reason. This is why critical race theory it really comes down to understanding these things so that we can unmake them, because this is a process of unlearning
Yeah.
for all involved. And this is, it feels particularly relevant being in the United States. Race is dealt with very differently here than in you know most other nations and many other nations in the world, and it's dealt with in other nations very differently here as well. So it is certainly not a topic I bring up lightly, but it is one that is worth discussing when we think about stories like this, because this is a story that is being told in the same time frame and in the same reality in which this takes place in the early 1800s. And we have stuff like Heart of Darkness, but being told about the same timeline where you have these deeply racist texts that
Yeah.
ended up deeply influencing Western culture. You can fast forward even a little bit to Rudyard Kipling and the Jungle Book and things like that. And I don't want to open up this whole can of worms, because this really is, but I just want to stop and take a moment, because as we're discussing this, I'm going to take my interpretation away from here moving forward, but I do want to touch on this because I think it is a really important part of the story to notice and to speak towards, because it's there. Like,
Yeah.
it's in front of us, and it's important to have it in front of you. So
Well,
I want to leave that there for myself.
yeah, that's a good point, and a good point that I personally didn't even think of. I didn't even think about it, and that is a very good point. This serves as an unfortunate segue to another criticism. Not necessarily a criticism. Yours wasn't really a criticism. Yours was more of a,
I would
hey,
call it
this
a
is,
critique.
A critique, sure.
which is a little different.
Yeah.
This is we're breaking down the philosophy in the same way we
Mm.
break down the design, which is understanding the elements of it.
Returning back to design, though, the one criticism that I do have about the game is a little bit tied as to telling a multinational story in what I am calling the Chinese top men dilemma. I'm sure that after saying those two words, Chinese top men, there have been a few listeners who have played the game who have broken to cold sweat because because this is probably the hardest part of
Yeah,
the game. So, according to Lucas Pope, every single soul is deducible through clues. You can every single character you do not need to guess and check. You can 100% be like this, then this,
this is
therefore
in the
this
text of the game.
in the text of the game. There's Lucas Pope has told in interviews that he had spreadsheets in which it allowed him to see like make sure that everything was logically deducible, that there isn't two double like oh it could be this or that. He also made it so that you could choose the fate of a character to be multiple things. So let's say you say a character is knifed, you stabbed is also accepted, for example. Like you don't need to be that exact. Like he gives you some leeway. But the criticism comes in that some of these clues are incredibly obtuse.
Yeah.
Like they are crazy. Like this one, so this next one, I'm gonna get this is not even the hardest one. The hardest one, not to bury the lead, is the Chinese top men. Emily Jackson versus Miss Jane Bird. Do you know how you're supposed to figure out who they are?
No.
So there's only three women on board, or three people that present as women. At this point, when you learn about Emily Jackson and Miss Jane Bird, the third one, Abigail, who is the captain's wife, has they have died, and you know how they look, so you know these other two people. It's one or the other. The way that you're supposed to figure out is that in one of the memories, you get to see Jane Bird's hand, and you notice it doesn't have a ring, while Emily Jackson does have a ring.
She's married.
Therefore, Miss is a prefix for somebody who isn't a woman who isn't married in those times. Therefore, she is Miss Jane Bird, and she's Emily Jackson. And honestly, this one is pretty, I'd say, middle of the road in terms of difficulty. Like I can see someone finding this and being
Yeah.
like, "Wow,
I,
I
it
feel
that
great."
you would feel very smart, I think, for
Yes.
figuring this out.
However, there's a bit of a problem. There's 60 souls. And while some of them are going to be easy, some of them are
Yep.
going to be hard, some of them in my opinion are going to be not asking too much. It's going to be asking too much of the player. Enter the Chinese top men. These are four top men, which, by the way, is another thing that is difficult in this game. There's a lot of nautical terms. A top man is somebody who works on the sails and rigging of the ship. So they're the ones that are working on these. Essentially, there's the ones in the movies that you see them like climbing up the rope ladders, and they're on top, and they're letting go of the sails, moving the ropes, and all these different things. And these four characters that hail from China are never mentioned by name. So there is absolutely no way for you to, in one of the memories, be like, one of them, his first name is Wei, and be like, oh, Wei, hard to starboard, or something like that, to give you, okay, Wei is here, and this, and there's, that does not happen. Personally, the way I solved it was that I had two other that I was pretty dang sure are correct, and then I guess and checked one of the Chinese characters until it was like you got it, and I was like okay, one down. Did that again with the second one, and after that, two of them I was able to guess and check and got lucky and got
Yeah.
out of the way. Do you know how you're supposed to figure it out?
I'm curious because I feel like I probably solved it similarly.
To how it's supposed to be?
No, to how you did it,
Okay.
where I was using the context clues of naming convention.
Gotcha. So the way that you're supposed to solve it is the second knowledge gap that is going to be an issue for some players, and that is cultural indicators. There are some characters, for example, Charles Minor, who has a very stereotypical French striped shirt.
Yes,
And
he
I
does.
jokingly was like, oh, that's the French guy. And I was right. And I was like, okay. So some of these are gonna be very stereotypical in their guess. And the
Yeah.
way that you get the Chinese top men is by seeing their footwear. They are the only characters in the whole game that have the Chinese footwear, which are very flat and not boots and have white soles. So it's like the
Oh,
ones in
right.
like in these martial arts movies. A lot of the martial arts fighters have those types of shoes.
Yeah, it's like
Uh,
a solid sole and then a cloth upper.
yeah, exactly, something
Yeah.
like that. And on that scene that you mentioned, a bitter cold, they have their legs hanging out, and therefore you know where they sleep. And later on, in later things, you will learn little by little, like, okay, one of them has died, and there's now three of them left. So this one person who died must have been blank. Oh, this one person who died was friends with this other person, and you can tell that they were friends because they were talking in another snapshot. I don't know why we need to assume that they were really good friends because they were talking in this one other snapshot. And therefore, now you can deduce that one of them, this is
Yeah.
person A. And then you get little by little, by looking at their shoes over time, you can tell. There's one character that I think is the best one. One of the actually better snapshots, in my opinion, also was really fun, was the lightning. Somebody gets struck by lightning.
That's
And it
such
is
a cool
one,
scene.
such a cool, and it is one of the Chinese top men. And that is your first inkling as to, okay, this is the person who died, and this is the one who's good friends. And I honestly, I still don't know 100% how you're supposed to figure out the names from all of this, but apparently there is a way. And so that is one of my criticisms. Like it is, there is a level of this is at a point that it is way you're asking way too much of the player. Maybe that's not 100% valid, given that you should be able to, since you have some leeway to guess and check. But yeah, it's a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there can be a couple moments where that falls apart, and I think if there's 60, you have to do this 60 times, if if 55 times you feel like a genius, or maybe I guess I should say 40 times you feel like a genius, and then 15 times you feel pretty smart, and 5 times you're like, this was not well designed. I mean, I'll take it because nobody else has ever done anything like this either. So
That's fair.
I do think it's a very fair criticism, and I recall being frustrated. In fact, my partner, when I mentioned that on your show notes to her, she's like, I think I remember you being frustrated here. So I think it's likely one that is worth mentioning. And like I'll be honest, like something that I can definitely work on. I am not extremely patient when it comes to, well, I guess I should say I'm not the most patient human on the planet, and in that I'm not super patient with puzzles. Like notably, I stopped playing Wordle because I was extremely impatient and I just couldn't do it. Like so, I'm too stupid for Wordle,
Wait a
everyone.
day
I'm
for another
sorry.
one.
What? I no, it wasn't that I couldn't wait for another one. It's just like I was just like I was like once I like failed 3 times, I'm like I don't want to do this anymore. This is not fun. I want to
Gotcha.
like I my limit is my knowledge. So and my grasp of the English language. So F you New York Times. But um yeah, so I was getting like frustrated at some points in this game as well, but it there's just like it's great because there is a lot here for everyone. Like there is like some sort of like seafaring mysticism that's going on that can be very interesting if you're into pirates and into sea stories and stuff like that. There's drama, there's mutiny, there's like life on the ship moments that I think probably should get spoken about more, where like I don't know how accurate it is, but it feels really satisfying to sort of just get, like I said, like these quiet moments, excuse me, these quiet moments on the ship where it's like the doctor talking to like the first mate about some people getting sick and like what this means. And it's like, I feel like in maybe mainstream media that you might consume about life on a ship, that's not the most common sort of story. Given maybe I'm not the largest consumer of these types of stories, so my pedigree is a bit limited here, but um, this is a really interesting way to sort of experience that whole world, and that kind of brings me to, I guess, my overall thesis. I don't have like a super well written out one like I did for Final Fantasy VI, but it really just comes down again to the ways in which Lucas Pope makes the player the author of the story, because you end up filling in this journal as the insurance adjuster. And so, in two ways, you both become the author of the story because you are writing a mystery story from the last scene to the first scene, which is generally how a mystery novelist would write a mystery novel, which is from the final moments and the reveal and the actual mystery, all the way back to the introduction and the opening sort of rising moments. But also in the ways in which the entire story is told through this lens of capitalism, and the ways in which the story is told through the lens of insurance adjustments and insurance contracts, because the impetus for going on the ship, the purpose for figuring out the story, is to mitigate and limit the amount of money that the East India Company has to pay out to surviving, insured members, whether it's benefactors from family and kin, like I mentioned earlier, wives, children, mothers, fathers, stuff like that, or companies that people were contracted from.
But
There are moments in the game there, like the game tells you like who's getting paid out and like what's going
yeah, at
on
the
with
very
these
end.
fates, and you're left with sort of in these final moments, once you've solved the mystery of what happened on the Obra Dinn, and you can tell this whole story, this fantastical, incredible, magically real story. You're left with a series of checks and balances and tally marks on a checkbook of the East India Company that sort of leaves you, I to me it kind of like was like this like really cathartic moment of I solved everything, and then I'm just kind of left with this like lingering almost bitter taste in my mouth of like, oh, this is actually all just, I was just mitigating payouts. And like I remember, there's moments where your character, the adjuster, is recommending payouts or not recommending payouts and stuff like that, but you don't have any control over that. That's not
You
your gameplay
kinda
element.
do though. I don't know if you know this, but depending on what you pick, remember how I said that there is some leeway as to how people died? Knifed versus stabbed? Apparently, there are some of them that will pay out more than others. So
Really?
if you say somebody was decapitated, it would be the payout would be greater than if you said that somebody was, I don't know, like stabbed, like something else, but that like,
Killed by a
oh,
sword.
technically, what's up?
Killed by a sword.
Yeah, killed by a sword. Like, as long as both of them are acceptable answers, like one of them is that a crab like decapitates somebody's head, but if you say, oh, they might have gotten strangled before getting crushed, or they might have gone like the game actually gives you leeway in those, and it actually
I didn't
gives
know
you
that.
more or less money. Yeah. So I didn't know about that. I learned about it just doing so. Oh,
Huh.
okay, interesting.
That's pretty
You can.
interesting.
There's actually, funnily enough, there is a Steam achievement called "The Captain Did It" loosely, in the eyes of the East India Company, which means is that you every single death say that the captain did it. And
Really?
you finish the game putting the right name to everyone, but you say shot by the captain, strangled by the captain, whatever by the captain, and then you leave. It'll be like, oh yeah, it was the captain's fault. The captain just went mad and killed everyone, and then killed
So you just
themselves.
have to say that you have to get all the deaths correct and
No,
all
you
of the
have to get
names
all the
correct.
names correct, but all the deaths incorrect, and attribute it to the captain.
Oh wow. That's actually kind of awesome.
So
I
there
had no idea.
is technically it is somewhat in your control to choose like,
That's
you
great
know
to know.
what?
I had no idea. That's really interesting.
You know what? Screw it. No, screw you. I'm not, I give $100 payouts to everyone. Because it's very jarring when you see how much money is getting paid out to the company, to the
Yes.
owner. It's like thousands. And then to the people who died, their widows, $50,
Yeah.
$30. Oh, this person didn't have anybody they left behind. Give it to the $30 donation to the pension fund. Like it is so
Yeah,
matterly of fact. Like
there yeah, there it does have this it does do that really incredible thing that only insurance companies can do, where you take moments of great trauma and terrible distress, and how's it go, insurance companies profitize the worst moments of human experience. So I mean, yeah, it is a very stark, sort of startling realization that you're left with at the end of the game, that you're like kind of just sitting here, like looking at this checkbook and this accounting of it all.
yeah. So before we go to final verdict, I kind of want to talk about one last thing.
Yeah, please.
Um, and it's coming back to the visual aesthetic of the 1-bit graphics. Now that we've talked with the listener, now that we've talked a little bit more about how amazing this game is, how just period. No, no further.
Yeah, no notes.
No
The game
notes.
is amazing. No
It's
notes.
amazing. Do you think, and this is like, I have two questions about the 1-bit graphics. I love them to bits. I love how it looks. It looks amazing. However, do you feel like the game is successful in spite of its graphics or because of it? Is question one. And question two, was there another aesthetic choice that could have served the game better?
Given the stipulation of your question, I would say that the game is successful uh, due to its graphics.
Interesting.
I found the presentation to be so striking and so meaningful, and extremely effective at putting me, the player, in a very specific mindset, that I think a even if it were if it were similarly modeled, but even given 16-bit color, I would find it to be maybe less impactful, because again, to the chiaroscuro of it all, it is so moody and so dramatic and so severe in its presentation that I think the visual style absolutely aids the overall effect of the story.
I've been flip-flopping back and forth
Talk to me about it.
for it. I think right now I think I stand on the side of I think that it's successful in spite of its visuals.
Okay.
Um I do think that they're awesome and I really do want to see more games with it, but I haven't found convinced myself that if this game had been done with traditional 3D graphics, that it wouldn't have been just as successful. Maybe not initially because it has such a marketing push and gimmick of how it looks. Versus if it just looked like another 3D modeled game, then maybe it didn't have like that initial punch. But I think
Right.
that eventually, by word of mouth, it would have gotten just as far, just because of how tight of a design the game is. I I feel like there were certain parts where going back to the example of going looking through the window, one of the abilities that I we never mentioned was that if you press and my there's a key that you can press to kind of focus in on a character, and if you focus on them for long enough, it shows you where they are in that picture in the journal.
Yes.
And that is an amazing tool that just gets used all over the place. There is a couple of snapshots where you can't use it because the person is too far away. And
Yeah.
because they're too far away, it's also difficult to tell who they are. And there were a couple times where I couldn't tell who this person got shot by because they're too far away and I can't can't use the thing, and there's the fidelity is just not there for me to tell who it was. This other thing is also maybe me being getting older. Um, my eyes got a little bit uncomfortable after 4 to 5 hours of
Yeah.
playtime. Maybe I'm not supposed to play it in a binge of of 4 to 5 hours like I did, but it is a little bit strenuous sometimes on the eyes. So I think I kind of go on the side of it being successful and inspired. Now, to what you said, if it was 16-bit graphics, I agree that this is better. The 1-bit graphic is better than a 16-bit graphic. Like this graphic style is much better than some other choices that could have been made. Um, I, I've started thinking about it of like, when you become a fan of something, you immediately think of ways of making something better, even though like you have absolutely no ownership as to whether to do it
How to
better.
make it
Like,
better for you.
how do I make it better for me? Or it's not me who's wrong. Everybody else is wrong. This is
Yeah, right.
look sensitivity. The One of the ideas was, what if we go back to the idea of live action cutscenes, but you use a live action 3D photography where you take a boat out on scene, you have all the actors stand right in the place, and you take a 3D snapshot and you scan the area so that way you don't model, you literally walk through a super high fidelity like picture of like a point in time. Like that would have been obviously super expensive. I do
Yeah, I'm in
not,
though.
but it would have been really cool, right?
Let's do it
This
in
is more.
VR.
Let's you.
Yeah.
You're speaking my language.
Yeah.
Just give me a few $1 million, just for the filming portion. Then I'll need another $1 million for development. But that's neither. Like
If you could just do that with $1 million in development, that would be impressive.
think I'm not a producer, I guess I don't know, but I think it might be doable. So goes to the question that you had asked me of like, how do I think of choosing an art style? What comes first and what comes second? For me, it's more I try to put into my mind what the game is, and then think, would this be better in 2D? Would this be better in retro graphics? Would this be better in 3D? And all these things, and I try to build from there. Um, Having said that, I like somebody who has the gumption to say, I like this art style. I'm gonna use it on my next game, regardless of what it is.
Yeah. I,
And
I
he did it.
think
The Mad Lad did it.
yeah, yeah, I take your point pretty seriously in terms of, thinking about becoming a fan of something and feeling like you have some ownership of it because you have a love of it, and that leads you to thinking about what makes it work better for you or might make it work quote unquote better in general. And I think to your point, the graphical style can be a bit jarring or grating in a long play session. I'm recalling moments where, like, I think it was like the Nintendo Wii would tell you to take a break. Um, but maybe I'm just creating that
No, no,
memory.
no, no, you're not. We did ask you, like, hey, for a while. Like, take
Maybe
a
maybe
break.
we need to bring back Wii breaks. Just take a stretch, put down the nunchuck. Get outside, touch some grass. But it is interesting because on one hand, like, you don't want a game's graphical style to grate on the viewer's, the player's visual sense for too long or at all, really. But at the same time, if it's a good mystery book, you don't want to put it down. So, like, a binge is going to be a natural experience because you're going to want to know what happens next. Now, that being said, I think to an earlier point I made, Obra Dinn does a really good job of creating these. Like, it's very easy to stop. It is very easy to. I've hit 3. I've solved. I'm back in the present. I'm done. I'll get up and I'll play this tomorrow. So, it's an interesting back and forth. And I do. I love a game that has that almost I hesitate to call it mobile, but I'll call it portable gaming design philosophy where you can play it in sessions. Maybe better to call it session based gaming. I'm thinking like
Or toilet gaming. You
I don't
play it,
really
you
like
play it,
that.
you go to the toilet, you play it for a little bit. Once you're done pooping, you're done.
No, I'm not. I think
Good,
I'll stick with
good.
session. I like
No,
session gaming.
I think it's good. I think,
Okay, we'll
uh,
send it. Yeah, let's just send it. Yeah, we don't need a focus group. Um, so I do appreciate that always, but yeah, I think you know the overall impact of something like the Obra Dinn is that it is it is not something that you see every day, and you're not going to see anything like it again. Really, you can see its inspiration, I think, in a number of places today, and I think you can see. I don't see its visual identity really anywhere else. But I think a lot of the principles of a very driven visual identity elsewhere. I can see the principles of storytelling in other places. You mentioned like 3D, like a fully 3D image with like live action with real actors and stuff, and my mind immediately jumps to something like Immortality that came out 2 years ago, which is a game that is on my short list and uses FMV, which is like old school gets when it comes to like adventure horror gaming, and so having that pop into your head, and then immediately I think to a game that a lot of people called a game of the year in 2022 or yeah, I think it was 2022. Um, is pretty interesting to see. I my mind jumps to stories like Pentiment that came out from Microsoft a couple of years ago as well. Another like really weird storytelling game that's kind of like not interested in being a game but is, and so I think it's an important game. And I guess I'll lead right into my final verdict here, but my final verdict is play the damn game. Like it's one of those games that I could very easily see being 50, 60 years from now being noted as one of the like critical games in the history of game development, and especially in the projection of games into art, or the proper perception of games as art, because I know some people probably still feel like this, but feel like games aren't art and they're museums of art, and I can't. It's a shitload of artists working together, and it's just a package that puts all these arts together, and I think that's really just you can't really subscribe to that sort of ideology at all anymore. It is so obvious in the same ways that that's like saying a movie isn't art; it's just a museum of art. So I hope if you're listening to this, you're in that same mindset as well.
Well, my final verdict is that if you've listened all the way to here and you haven't played it, what have you done?
I
How
know.
dare you? How dare you? You turn this podcast, go to the corner and think of what you've done. Because
But please
I
leave
don't
us a
know.
5-star rating on iTunes before.
Yeah, I don't know if I would recommend it. If we talk to you about the Kraken, like I would recommend it as an artifact of game design analysis. So approaching it that way as like, oh, I want to analyze how this game did these things, then sure. But just as a consumer experiencing it, I mean, it's like I tell you, Jason, I got this killer burger with this delicious, delicious special sauce. The special sauce is to die for. And then I serve you the burger without the special sauce. I
I
mean,
mean, isn't that what
maybe.
people are doing now? Like, aren't like people like gatekeeping like crazy on social media where they're like, look at this awesome burger I got, but I won't tell you where I got it because I have to keep the spot local.
Oh, yeah.
I have to keep the spot on the DL.
Yeah,
So
well, yeah,
maybe that's
that.
it. Maybe that's what we need to do. We need to just start downvoting all of our game suggestions so that we can stay hip and cool.
Yeah, okay, so next week we were going, what is a downvoted to heck I can't even think of a game that we would do.
Army of Two.
Anyways, Army. Excellent. Army of Two. We're gonna stream it on using items.
I'll give you my
Uh,
actual final verdict. 0 out of 10. There's no consumable items for us to use.
no consumable items.
I
What
don't
the
have a
heck?
single one. The
What the
only items
heck?
I get, I have to use. On a real note, in terms of items, because that's the podcast. The one thing I don't think we talked about was that the game has a feature where it'll tell you every other scene that a character you're interested in or trying to solve for has been in,
Yeah,
which is super useful. And like,
yeah.
hats
There's
off
a lot of
again
nice little
to
quality of
Lucas
life.
Pope for just like thinking of some real powerful QOL stuff. But
Hmm.
yeah,
And I guess if you're somebody who can forget in a year's time what we talked about, sure, go ahead. Play it
yeah.
wait a
Oh
year
no.
and play it. Wait a
My
year, play
suggestion:
it.
do what Aislinn did, do what my partner did, and tell somebody else to play the game, and then watch them play it. Extremely satisfying, according to her. Because you probably won't remember all of it, but you'll remember a lot of it, and then you get to watch somebody you love and care about flail as they try to solve a mystery that you know the answer to, which
Nice.
is the next best thing to solving a mystery, right?
Yeah. So yeah, one of those weird verdicts where the non-spoiler verdict is highly recommend, and the spoiler verdict is "Ah, why? Why didn't you do? Why didn't you
Well, or
listen?
you
What are you?
did it. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. You are just as smart as the inspector solving the 60 fates of who
Yes.
they are and what fate befell them.
And the fate that befell us today was we were cursed to use our items. So thank you so much for joining us on this episode, episode 8, I believe, of Use Your Items. You can find us wherever you find podcasts. I'm sure you already did as you're here now. If you're looking for more in the future, check us out wherever you might find us. You can also find us on twitch.tv/use your items. We will be streaming actually this week, although this episode won't come out this week. We're going to stream and try to do a little bit more streaming with our community. So if you're interested in playing any games with us or chatting with us more, check us out on our Discord, linked in the show notes below. You can catch me on my blog, useyouritems.substack.com. You can find me on Twitter at Dancing Frog Game, although I don't use it too much. And you can also shoot us an email at useyouritems@gmail.com. Where can they find you, Fran?
They can find me on Twitch on L_Fantastico, and also on Threads and Insta as El Fantastico. So you can find me there. I'm gonna start being hip and start posting more. So
Big
I need to
poster
get
energy.
I need that big poster energy if I am going to
You got
develop
it.
a game and market.
No,
So
I'll be there. I'll be your first buyer.
wow, thank you.
But please, if you're still here, thank you. I don't know why you're still here, but we love you. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great week. And if you have any time or availability, please, please, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. It does really help. It makes a big difference. And we will forever love you. And we'll give you a shout out if you tell us that you did it, I guess. And send us a screenshot. I don't know. Send me an email. Anyway, I love you all. Have a great week. Bye.